What's up? What's up? What's up, everybody? It is Mikael here for another episode of Funnel Vision. I am very excited for my next guest. This is Tim Kilroy. Tim and I have had a couple conversations. We've got a lot of mutual friends. We spent a lot of time talking about this internet marketing and this kind of digital marketing space, growing agencies. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you, Tim. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
It's going to be a lot of fun. So as I always do with everybody, I always start with your humble brag. So I want you to not be so shy, like brag. What have you been able to do for your clients? What have you been able to do for your own business? In other words, why should people listen to you?
I started 3 agencies. I crashed one so hard that they had to call in FEMA, and then I sold 2 of them. And I didn't really think that was anything amazing. Selling's fun and all that kind of stuff. But what I figured out is that I had been through this bridge that so many people want to get to, which is getting a business into a position where it's ready to be sold, and then having the optionality to sell it or not. And that's really what I try to help my clients do. Our funny little tagline is more revenue, more profits, more happy.
Right.
And a lot of people think that's a formula, like more revenue plus more profits equals more happy. That's totally not true. So I help, those are 3 independent things that can be optimized. And my real goal is to have everybody learn the mechanics of optimizing 1 and 2, revenue and profits.
Yep.
So that they can experience 3. Right. So in 3, I'll tell you, in my first agency, the one that crashed, I was so freaking miserable. First of all, because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yep.
And I became the hub through all the spokes and all that sort of stuff. And I had to touch everything. And we ended up, frankly, crashing because I was too busy to send out invoices.
Yeah, it's a problem.
Yeah, and then when you send out an invoice asking somebody for 6 months of payment, they're like, shut up, no.
Yeah, exactly. What do you mean? You haven't been doing this work for free this whole time? I thought.
Or it's not the fact that you can't send out the invoice is not my problem.
Yeah, it's true. I had that problem. Just a side note, I had that exact same problem with one of my my former accountants. He didn't invoice me for 2 years. And then he tried to invoice me on year 3 for 2 years worth of work. And I'm like, but no, I'm not. This is too bad for you.
And also your accountant, I would want him to or her to give it over to somebody else.
Yeah, let's not go down that. Let's not go down that.
But thinking specifically about the happy part, and the happy part really comes down to understanding the kind of agency that you want to run. And that is where I start with everybody. So I'm not an agency coach that gives you templates to follow or business in a box.
Right.
Because I think your business would make me a little crazy.
Oh, man. That's fair.
And I am 100% sure that my business would make you crazy.
Probably.
Right. And so there is no idea that there's a process or a vision or a set of steps that suits everybody. You really have to understand the landscape of where you are. And doing that, I've helped clients go from $15,000 a month to right now they're a little over $300,000 a month and are in deep negotiations around an exit that would give the founder more money than this person has ever thought about in their lives.
It's amazing when you have that kind of guidance and that roadmap. And it's interesting that you say revenue, profit, and happiness, and how it's not a formula, because it's true. I'm in the software space. We all know that revenue does not equal profits in software. A lot of times it actually means more losses than anything else, right?
It means more costs.
Yeah, it means more costs. And on the flip side, optimizing for profit, a lot of times people think that they want to hit $1 million in revenue, $3 million in revenue, $10 million in revenue. but what they actually want is 300,000 in profit or 400,000 in profit.
Yeah, and I just spoke to a new client of mine who had been through 3 or 4 coaching programs,
Yep.
and he thought that the problem was him because every time he went through one of these coaching programs, he was given, this is your landing page, this is your sales process, this is how you make an offer. And none of those worked for him because the agency types that those programs created were not the agency that he was running.
Right.
And so it didn't matter how often or how well he followed that script, it wasn't his. And so we have just started working together, and he's following those other business models that aren't his. He's lost about $400,000 over the last 2 years. It's because he's just been investing in other people's ideas.
Yeah, and that happens, and the reality is there's so many coaches, so many people out there who try to teach you a methodology, and it's not that methodology does not work. It just, the question is, does it work for you and what you want and what you're looking at? And I think the happiness factor is extremely important.
It's hugely important. And also, one of the things to understand, and I'm not shitting on other agency coaches because there's a bunch of amazing ones out there, but those agency coaches that have a trick, a thing that they know how to do,
Yep.
or they are selling you a new business model, like those ads that I've seen recently. I took my $66,000 a month agency and burned it to the ground, blah, 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 blah. Do those folks have enough breadth of experience to be able to see how what they know how to do applies to your agency or not?
Totally.
I know that I look 27. I know. But I'm really freaking old. I've been doing this stuff since 1997.
Yeah, don't date yourself, buddy.
Oh, well, it's my birthday this week. It's my birthday on Wednesday, and I'm super happy to be 57.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Happy early birthday. Yeah, you've been at this for almost 30 years. But it actually shows you that you've gone through an evolution. So let's talk about that evolution. I want to understand that journey. I want to understand, how did you get to the stage where you're helping agencies, and what were the ups, the downs? Walk me through that journey.
Yeah, started an agency, had no idea what I was doing, crashed it. It was miserable. I had to get a job. It was terrible. And by the way, I was an accidental agency owner. I never intended to own an agency, but I became an agency owner after the .com crash, and I could not find a job. After that happened, I actually had to go get a job. That was terrible. I'm very bad at having jobs. I had to get to the point where I frankly was working for myself as quickly as possible. So I started another agency, and with my business partner and I, we were able to scale that up and exit inside of 2 years. And we exited to an agency that was much, much bigger, way further down the road. We filled a great strategic hole for them. And I was really excited to build a new experience inside of that agency, which we did. And we quickly generated a bunch of revenue for the agency. And then my 2 years of indentured servitude were over. And I was able to leave, though I did have a non-compete. Those are still a thing at that point. So I couldn't work on the agency side. So I became a CMO on the client side. And then I got the itch to make another agency, scaled that up, and exiting that one as well. And after that, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to build another agency because I'd just done that two times in a row.
Yep.
And so I was doing a bunch of consulting and all that sort of stuff. And I was working with some marketers, and all that stuff was cool, but it didn't hit my happiness quotient. It was good work, great money, but I just wasn't excited about it. And then a friend of mine, whom I've known for a really long time, came to me, and she said, my agency's been stuck at $700,000 a year for the past 3 years. And 3 years ago was great. Now it's not. And she said, can you give me some advice? So sure, I'll try coaching you. That's great. And as soon as I did that, the sun came out and rainbows were there. There were bunnies everywhere. There's music playing. And I thought, oh, hey, this is what I'm supposed to do. And that was 5 years ago, almost 6. And now that agency owner, by the way, she's going to crack $2.2 million this year with a team that is 1/3 the size of her team when she was at $750,000.
Wow, that's awesome.
I mean, that's all, by the way, that's all her. Like, she did all the hard work. All I did was say, like, oh, like, think about it this way. Don't do that. Try this other thing. So it's all on her. She's awesome and amazing. But that is essentially what happened. Is I realized I had this 20 years of experience starting agencies, working in larger agencies, being a buyer of agency services.
Yeah.
And so I have a really holistic view of how this whole thing works. So jumping in as a coach, like it made it so easy for me to not necessarily say, this is what you should do, because nothing, as we just talked about, all landscapes are different, but building an agency is not about the tactics. It is really about understanding what you are good at, what you're not good at, what your role is in the agency at any given time. And
so let's dive a little bit more. I know it's not about the tactics, but let's dive a little bit more into a little bit of the tactics here, or the strategy. Specifically, let's take this client as an example who went from 700. They were stuck there for a long time, had 3 times the team size, now doing 2-point-something million with 1/3 of the team. So walk me through, where were they at the time? And how was the business operating? How did they make 700,000? What was it for retainers?
Basically, they do SEO and content for B2B, and they do some paid media for B2B as well. What we did is we started with just the mechanical part. Which part's making money, which one isn't? So we knocked out the paid media because they did fine with it, but frankly, it wasn't making any money. And also that was always the secondary sale. So we just were able to get rid of that. And then we really worked on positioning. And they knew who their customer was, but they were always in the spot where they had to take whatever customer said yes, because they needed the money to support this team that was too big. So essentially, we worked on positioning, so it became very clear whom they work with and what their benefit is. So that really sharpened up their ability to attract clients who were much closer to their ideal client than what they had been getting previously. We also then worked on lead gen. We worked on cold outreach, did not work for them, nor they were not invested in it necessarily. So we came up with these idea of work sessions. So they would reach out to a client and do a virtual, how to make your content team better work session. It was usually an hour and a half. They didn't charge for it, which eventually they ended up charging, but at the beginning they didn't charge for it. And that essentially, that hour and a half of them walking through their process and getting feedback from the team who would implement that process really helped them not only hone their message, but it showed the potential clients what an extraordinary value they could provide. So if they could change the content team's perspective in an hour and a half, what could they do in a 6-month-long project or a year-long project together?
Okay. So it was a combination of making sure that there was a proper lead gen process, refining the product offering itself, the service offering, by not doing too many things and just basically doubling down on the zone of genius. And what about pricing? Did you work on pricing with them?
Yes, the pricing is about 5 times what it was. And functionally so they were very stuck in this sort of dollars per hours mode. And so we killed that right away. We went to project mode. But what we did alongside of that is we found ways to do labor arbitrage. So what was the lowest value stuff that they did? suddenly went to contractors and didn't, as long as they understood the process and could execute the work, it didn't matter where they were. So they were able to find good quality talent at reasonable prices other places. And so over time, what has happened is the strategy and the account management lives here in the US. And basically strategy, account management, sales lives here in the US. And then basically everything else is through contractors throughout the world. Some are in the US, some are in the Philippines, some are in Canada. But that's really that was their choice, because once they realized what they had, they realized that there was probably only 25% of what they did was needed experience and high value thinking. And most of what they had been spending their budget on previously was lower value stuff that was repetitious, keyword research, that sort of stuff. And so they're able to take that, move it overseas, reduce their costs dramatically. And that the freedom that gave them with margin, they were able to hire better people to do the high value stuff. So there's the core team is actually paid much better than they used to be, because they're doing work that is right for them.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So in general, when you look at kind of businesses or agencies, I should say, and you speak to them, like can you come up with a 1, 2 in order of what are the biggest challenges what are the things people get wrong that prevent them from growing their agency? In other words, like what's your best growth tactics?
So this is both a tactic and a strategy. You have to own this idea. Your job is not to create happy clients. Your job is to create teams and systems that create happy clients. And you work for your team, and your team works for the client. And if you cannot keep that in your head all the time, every day, that your job is to give the team everything it needs so the team can do everything it needs to do for the client, that frees up so much bandwidth, and it stops you from jumping in and doing the work. Because when you jump in and do the work, even if you're working alongside your team, you're sending this awful message to them: I'm better at this, so just back out of the way. The adults are here now. And you can't do that. I think the 5 words that will kill your agency fastest are: never mind, I'll do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the strategies I've learned over the years that really helps with this is before you ever, if your team comes to you with any sort of problem, it's called the 1-3-1. And basically the idea is very simple. You ask them, like they come to you with one problem, you ask them to give you 3 possible solutions. And then you ask them, what do you think is the best of those 3 solutions? And typically, before they even come to you, they'll have, here's the problem, here's the 3 solutions, here's what I think is the best solution. It will have given them the ability to think it through, to come up with it. And most of the time, they actually come up with the best solution. And if not, then you can walk through and work through it with them, but it alleviates you from that kind of, hey, I'm just going to have to do it and I'm just going to get it done.
It's the gift of autonomy and authority.
So let me ask you this then. If that's the case, what do you say to the agency owners who aren't operationally minded? So there's a lot of people who start an agency because they are marketers, they are tactical, they're good at something, they're not good at managing people, they're not operationally minded, they're not systems driven per se. They just know how to do something really well. And then they get into that stage where it's, I don't like operations. I actually don't like managing people. But I still want to grow this. I still want to get it past this stage. So what do you say there?
So I don't like managing people. You got to get over it, because as CEO, that's your job. Nobody else can manage the team. Now, you might have leaders that are under you that manage other parts of the team, but your job as chief executive officer is management. Like you're at the top of the org chart, like that's your job. So if you're not willing to invest in yourself to create the skill set and the mindset to do that, you're a solo freelancer, and that's not a bad thing. That's awesome because you can make a lot of money doing that, but you can't build an organization if you are not willing to manage it. Now, can you get help with it? Can you get a head of services or a COO or something like that? Yes. But if you don't know how to manage your team, you're not going to know how to manage the head of services or the COO. Like they cannot. Nobody is self-managing, and also management is not a native human skill set. Or we work in peer groups, honestly, and the hierarchies are weird. They don't necessarily make sense to our brain, and hierarchies they create an us versus them dynamic. Where we are in the world and at this time, once you assign yourself the title of CEO, you have to be a manager. There's no way around it. And if you're not a systems thinker, that's cool. That's totally fine because you can find people that are system thinkers and they can take the vomit that you throw up and turn it into something that works. But you have to be willing to manage that person that can do that stuff.
Yeah, I think it's very important to, this kind of brings us back to the very beginning of the conversation of understanding what is your happiness level and optimizing for happiness, because I think a lot of times people assume they want a 2, 3, $10 million agency because it sounds really cool. And then they realize that even though it sounds good and your ego is driving that, what you actually want from a happiness level is you want a very small team. You want to not have to, you want people who are ultimately self-starters. And yes, you're always going to have to motivate them. You're always going to have to set the direction and the vision, but it may not align with you in terms of managing, right? A CEO ultimately is a chief executive officer, which means that they are there to manage the executive team. And at the end of the day, you may not want that and it may drive you nuts, right? It may make you not happy.
Yeah, I would say that like the people who think that they want 100-person agency, there's a handful of people in the world who want that because that's what makes them happy.
For sure. And if you're at that stage, if you have that mindset, I would look in the mirror and double check whether that's your ego and that's just you want to have that number next to your name, or whether it's actually what you really want to build and that's a life you want to build alongside it.
And also one thing that almost all first-time CEOs get wrong is the idea that management is task management. And they think they can just create SOPs that will alleviate the need for human interaction, and that if it's in the SOP, it works every time. Like SOPs are there to prevent failure, not create success.
And that's a very good, always remind yourself that there's a reason pilots go through an SOP before taking off and they go through a checklist. It's like you said, to prevent a crash, not because, oh, okay, let's make sure this gets to the destination. No, it's let's make sure we don't die. Exactly. And that's a good way to think about that. So with that said, Tim, this has been a really cool conversation. I'd love to know, where can people learn more about you? If they do want some assistance with coaching, if they want some help growing their agency, where can they find you?
TimKilroy.com. I sweated over that domain for a long time. I picked that one eventually. That's because it was easy. Or LinkedIn. Those are the two biggest places. I'm not hard to find in either spot. And we've got programs that start at like $150 a month, all the way up to things that are really bespoke and super duper expensive. And so there is an option for, frankly, everybody. And I'm not such a big fan of pushing. You'll never get a hard sell from me, because if I have to sell you hard,
that means you're not ready.
They're not ready, or I did not do a good enough job articulating the value.
That's a fair point. It's one of the two, and
Sometimes it's both.
Sometimes it's both. There you go. Sometimes it's both on that end. So with that said, hopefully people saw the value, but either way, I had a great conversation with you. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Delighted to be here.